Christian leaders talk in grandiose terms about vision, but is visioning for the ordinary missionary or pastor?
A ministerial vision is a cognitive and personal perception of the way things ought to be for the glory of God and the good of the church in my sphere of influence and what God would have me to do about it.
We'll explore that topic today with Bob Bixby of Redeemer Church in Fremont, California. But first, a word from ABWE President Paul Davis.
ABWE missionaries are coming beside the lost and the hurting around the world. And through the Global Gospel Fund, they're pulling people from the darkness and training them as leaders. They're planting churches, and they're even beginning their own missions movements. You may already support one ABWE missionary. Would you consider a gift to the Global Gospel Fund to support all 1,000 of our missionaries? Thank you for that.
Become a partner today at abwe.org/Global Gospel Fund. Welcome to the Missions Podcast, the show that explores your hard questions on missions, theology, and practice to help goers think and thinkers go. I'm Alex Kochman, Director of Advancement and Communications for ABWE, joined by Scott Dunford, West Coast Advancement Coordinator and Lead Church Planter for Redeemer Church in Fremont, California. And I know more than get that title out of my mouth, then I'm thinking that we also have a guest here today whose title is similar and overlaps in some ways, a colleague of yours, Scott, and we're excited to dive into that today. But as we dive into this topic, I remember working at a highly, I would say, organizationally developed church years ago, one that was very much within the attractional church movement. And so there was certain, from my perspective, negatives about that, but also certain positives that from an org standpoint, things like vision, things like mission statement were highly developed because, hey, like any other organization or business, right? We want to have those things. We want to have those things on record, written down, leading with those things. And so moving from that to a ministry setting where sometimes you see, especially at a smaller scale, things like vision, things like mission they're a little bit more nebulous in a smaller ministry context. Is it okay to say that out loud? Have you experienced that, Scott? Right?
Well, yeah. And then you've got some that, like they're just like, hey, all the vision we need is the Great Commission. Just go make disciples. That's what you got to do. And it kind of cuts out any kind of planning or long-term vision that goes with any more detail than that. And so, So Bob and I get a chance to work together. Bob is not only the founding pastor of Redeemer Church, but he's also the president of our church planting arm of our ministry out of our church called Bayseed, and has given a lot of time and attention and spoken on this topic of vision. And really, it was Bob's articulation of the vision that was something that got me excited about even coming out to California and changing our life, and really still forms the basis of what we're trying to do out here in the Bay Area. And so it's my pleasure to welcome Bob to the show. Bob, thank you for coming back on. You were here 2 years ago as we were talking about coming out to California, and actually a little over 2 years. And it's good to have you on.
It's great to be back. Thank you.
So tell us, Bob, what do Christian leaders get wrong about vision? Let's start there. I've heard it both ways. I've heard it discussed where if you're in ministry, if you're in any kind of leadership whatsoever, if you don't have a written vision statement and mission statement, all those sorts of things, and if those things aren't guiding your daily activities, you're going to fail. And I've seen that all the way to the opposite extreme of we're not going to write any of those things down because just the Holy Spirit's going to work and we're just going to handle the text of Scripture and not really even think intentionally about leading in those areas. Is there a middle ground? What do we get wrong?
There probably is a middle ground. I think for the average guy, and I would consider myself the average guy, I don't have a huge ministry and, just kind of an average ministry preparation. But I think we see words like vision, mission, and those kinds of things, and they're very abstract terms. And so we either we get too specific and say, God has given me a vision to reach the entire neighborhood while riding elephants and throwing out candy and tracts, and start raising money for something that's ridiculous. Or we get too unspecific. God just wants me to lead people to Jesus. And I think, interestingly enough, William Carey, when I started thinking about this, he's an illustration of bleeding one term of any significance and then also modeling specificity in another term. In the parish, he famously said, "The world is my parish," which practically renders the word parish useless, right?
True.
And
Yeah.
then, but he had a very, very specific vision for how he was going to reach the world, the part of the world where he was at, and that was through Bible translation. And he doggedly persevered in that, even when a fire came and burned down all of his work. The very next day, he got up and started going at it again. He never lost focus. That was his particular vision as to how he was going to go about it. So to me, I think maybe in answer to your question, I think perhaps we need to spend a little bit of time at least knowing how we define these terms, vision and mission and so forth, so that we can stay consistent in our own head as we go forward.
So go ahead and do that. What do you mean by vision? And, is the same thing meant by you and talking about ministry vision is like what we would read in Andy Stanley visioning or the greatest new business guru, or is it a little bit different for the Christian missionary or pastor?
Well, at least for me, it's different. I don't know if you know this, Scott, but David Hasselgrave was kind of a mentor for me because he spent his retirement years in Rockford, Illinois, and he gave me about 100 books that I have surrounding me right now.
I'm a little jealous about that and salty still.
Just a sweet guy that spent 4 hours a day, even in his retirement, thinking about missiology. Mm-hmm. But one line in the very first chapter of his first book, or one of his most important books on communicating Christ cross-culturally, is communication is the missionary problem par excellence. And that you could insert other words where missionary is. Communication is a marriage problem par excellence or whatever. But he nails it there on the fact that between the receiver and the sender, the receiver at least needs to know what he's saying. So for me, when I started thinking about vision or started talking to other pastors or some men that I was mentoring and they'd use the word vision, it started becoming clear to me that it meant a lot of different things to different people. So in my mind, how I'm trying to use it is not dreaming or fantasizing or wishing or, having a passionate desire for something or even ambition. It's not even mission, what the mission is, which might be a little bit more task oriented or objectives and plans. Mm-hmm. Or it's just not being a crazy big outside of the box thinker. To me, vision is much more akin to a calling that God gives to a person as well as to a group of people. So I think you can have shared vision or overlapping vision, and I don't think any individual can have an exact vision with another individual. So like Scott and I are working together and we have overlapping vision enough to work together, but it shouldn't be exactly the same because we're individual servants of God. So this is cumbersome. It's clunky. It's a terrible way to present a definition, but it works for me and I break it down later. But a ministerial vision is a cognitive and personal perception with sharpening insight and understanding of the way things ought to be for the glory of God and the good of the church in my sphere of influence and what God would have me to do about it. Or if you wanted to make it a group vision, it's cognitive in the sense that you can articulate it and we all can see what's happening. And it's constantly clarifying, but we understand what ought to be for the glory of God and the good of the church and what we can do about it. So I think, and the reason I think of glory of God and the good of the church is how I personally came to identify or define cross-bearing. Because again, that's another cliche that we Christians use all the time. Oh, that's my cross to bear. I got an ingrown toenail. That's my cross to bear.
Sometimes.
And but what does it, right? But my atheistic neighbor has an ingrown toenail too. What is that? His cross, right? So to me, cross bearing, in my mind, I started defining it and trying to articulate it to those around me is voluntarily sacrificing for the glory of God and the good of the church, because that's what Jesus' cross did. He voluntarily sacrificed for the glory of God and the good of the church. And there's no sacrifice more ultimate or better or more cross bearing more significant than his, of course.
I've got a follow-up question with that, though. So the Christian discipleship path of cross-bearing, though, is for every believer. Visioning, though, is something we've typically articulated with, typically associated with leadership. So are you saying every Christian is a leader in that sense, or are you separating those two?
No, but I'm saying that cross-bearing, where I did all that to say that cross-bearing informs my thinking of visioning. Because a lot of our dreams, we who any of us who have been in ministry or started to want to go to ministry when we were in college, know that there was a narcissistic component to some of our dreams, if we're honest.
Especially for Scott.
And
true.
God has a way of bleeding the narcissism out of our service over time if we're really called.
Yep.
And so to me, the vision, the quote unquote vision that I had when I was 19 was more like a big fantasy or a dream, and was not cultivated through understanding of culture, understanding of the Word of God, understanding of my own self, understanding of other people, and understanding of my context. So once you get all of that data from self, context, culture, Word of God, experiences informing you, God starts to give you a vision, and that vision is going to have the qualities of being entirely focused for the good of the church and the glory of God. So that's why I equate it to cross-bearing. I think someone who truly has a vision that is from God will be willing to sacrifice significantly for it.
Or else it's not much of a vision if you're not willing to sacrifice anything for it.
Right.
Yeah. And it seems to me the specificity of the vision and being able to kind of envision, okay, this is the outcome, right? And we see that with William Carey in an interesting way, and probably a way that he never really fully understood. In some ways, when he said that the world is my parish, he actually his work in missiology and his initial inquiry really did allow the world to become the parish of the larger body of Christ, and helped Christians to see that. And so there was I think he had a vision toward what the end could look like that he did give his life for and was willing to sacrifice everything for. And certainly he did. So I love that example, both positively and negatively. Alex, I think you had a follow up.
Well, let me pick your brain, Bob. I appreciate this conversation in that, we're a bunch of ordinary guys. None of us here are famous, right? We're not having the conversation with whoever the leadership expert is that you want to pick, that's nationally known or what have you. And so we can kind of be a little bit transparent. Never mind the fact that people are listening in on this on a recording, but
nationally,
internationally, when people have asked me, and yes, I'm obviously the youngest one here. When people have asked me, where do you see yourself in 5 years, 10 years, all those sorts of things, I've always just found it very difficult to transport myself into the future and answer those questions. I remember one of my first days in the job at ABWE, our president at the time asked, what's your dream job? And I thought about it. I'm like, what I get to do now is as close to a dream job that I've had, right? And that's shifted a little bit over time. But my question to you is every person supposed to be a visionary? Does every person need to be a visionary? Or is it a personality trait, somebody that just tends to be more future oriented? Is it something that can be honed or developed within your view? Are you necessarily going to be a poor leader if you're not always future oriented? And by the way, I should throw this out there. I do think about the future, everybody. I want to make that clear that I'm not completely ignoring the future, but you see what I'm saying, sort of.
But you're content in the present, and that's a good thing.
I'll try to be.
Yeah. I think that I would have a problem if leaders don't have a vision.
Right.
In my way of thinking, I think a leader has to have a vision. He has to know where he's headed, I would think. I'm not saying he has to know how to articulate it, but I would think that even the most inarticulate leader who's effective has a vision that compels him and drives him, and he can answer the big why. Why am I here? And why do I think what I'm doing right now is going to make a difference in the future? I think it's to everybody's advantage if they go to the work of trying to figure that out. But maybe that specificity, like 5 years from now. Well, why do people say 5? Why not 6? Why not? Why not 4? Why not 3? It seems so arbitrary. But
you got 5 fingers on your hand.
There you go.
Well, you might have 6. I don't know.
So I think you get, if I could describe kind of a vision that kind of started shaping coming out here, it became informed by a number of years on the mission field, then in a local church for about 12 years, pastoring, then my own soul, my own family needs, and the things that just really impassioned me. We came out here through a providential relationship, and getting out here and learning about the Silicon Valley, the whole Bay Area, the situation of churches that are existing, the fact that it's the least churched area, all of these different things started forming in my mind this vision for what we could do, and that's why I say it's what I could do, what my gifts are. There's kind of narrow and not very broad, but there's some things that I can do, and so I think that's the cognitive part of the and personal part of vision. But I would say that over the 5 years before Scott joined us, it was constantly focusing and sharpening. And then when Scott came, there was renewed sharpening, and still is renewed sharpening and focusing. But the most important part, I think, of my definition is really looking around me and thinking, this is a way things ought to be for the good of the church and the glory of God. And so it does move from abstraction to concrete, because for me, it became apparent that the traditional way of pastoring, as in the most recent traditional way of pastoring, was just not going to be effective here, and that we needed to adopt more of a parish concept of pastoring, that we needed to encourage and liberate pastors who would come, and I wanted them to be generals with blood on their uniform, because they've been through stuff before they got here. That they would come and they would be able to borrow from the Scottish Presbyterian model of 500 years ago of parish, glebe, manse, work, and church, as far as how they diversified their time, and be free, fully supported to do that, work relationally. So all of these things, without boring you with those concrete elements, they start shaping into kind of concrete goals, but they're not inflexible, and they certainly can be modified. But I would think that a true leader has to have a vision. To use the verse that that is always taken out of context and to use it again out of context. Without a vision, people perish.
There you go. Wow, it took us 19 minutes and we finally dropped that line.
Yes.
So, okay. Surprised it took that long.
But if we respect the actual understanding of that verse, the actual interpretation of that verse, as I understand it, it's about prophecy.
Yeah.
Then there is a leadership component in that verse still.
Yeah.
Because Christian ministers are and ought to be prophetic.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So how do you develop this then? If someone like myself who strives to live contentedly in the moment, struggles to realistically maybe connect where I am right now with 20 years from now into the future, and then reverse engineer that into what I need to be doing in the meantime. How can a leader develop vision within your model?
Yeah, you guys have seen the meme, right? They say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not.
Thank you, Michael Scott.
I think, this is to me, a vision is something that God gives us, and maybe the focusing and sharpening aspect of it takes time. And I would encourage people to just believe, especially leaders, believe that God really will give you a vision. If you don't have it, don't panic, just wait for it and serve God with, energy and enthusiasm. Because sometimes God shelves gifts that you think you have that are more important for the church and has you doing something differently. I was sharing with the church the other day, I'm keeping my father-in-law who has Alzheimer's, and he's, it's like having a toddler, except he can move about, and there's a lot of things that I need to do for him. And a couple months ago, in the middle of the night, when he had an accident, I was changing him and I was putting on these compression socks. And Jenny was really sick, so she couldn't help me. There was just nobody there. But the thought occurred to me as I'm putting on his socks, of the 7 billion people in the world that are here right now, I'm the only one that can do this. And if Jesus were physically in this room, this is what he would do, unless he would speak and say, "Socks be on, be applied," or whatever. And that gave me a real sense of joy to not worry about the 2,000 books in my library that I feel like I'm better equipped to read. At that moment, I was a sock putter on her, and I was the only one of 7 billion people to be the sock putter on her there. And I think that we have to learn to be a servant, because if God does give us a vision, there will be a time. If it's a God-given vision, I can't imagine it ever comes without denial of self and sometimes deep sacrifices. But there are ways to start shaping it. I think Scott, is the one that showed me first the video of the guy dancing in the. You could YouTube it. A guy dancing in the field all by himself, and he just was a crazy, and he just danced forever. It seemed like forever, and lots of people sitting around picnicking or whatnot. And then eventually somebody came and joined him, and another person came and joined him. Now there's 2 or 3 just dancing, frenetically and weirdly. And then suddenly the whole mob is dancing. And I think, when we do have a vision, we got to be willing to be the lone nut that's just on that particular, that's fully invested without inhibition in it. And then pray for those first followers who are just crazy enough to do it. And I think, though, that every one of us has to be in leadership. There's a element of lone nutness that we all have to be. So I don't think even out here, Scott, in one sense, we could say Scott was kind of one of the crazies that came and saw me dancing frenetically and wildly with a bunch of people saying how weird he is. And he came and started dancing too. But but Scott, being a leader, is going to have to be a lone nut, and is a lone nut himself, attracting first followers to himself. To me, vision is attractive.
And just for a reference point, you can go to Derek Silvers. That's who that. It's Leadership Lessons from the Dancing Guy by Derek Silvers. You can see that on the internet.
Well, people ask how we ended up with the name The Missions Podcast, but I think we could have gone with The Lone Nuts, and I think that would have been, perfectly sufficient. There's a lot more that we can dive into here as well, and we're going to do that with Bob Bixby, president of Bayseed, founding pastor of Redeemer Church in Fremont, California, after this quick break.
Hi, I'm Scott Dunford, and I'd like to share with you about a new nonprofit ministry established to help churches, Christian schools, and other ministries protect children and prevent abuse. Rich Hamar from Church Law and Tax states that the number one reason that drives churches to court is child sexual abuse. I can't think of anything more devastating to these lives, their families, and our witness before a watching world than sexual abuse that takes place in ministry. The traumatic impact often leaves the vulnerable not wanting anything to do with God or His people. Our efforts toward evangelism, discipleship, and spiritual formation are not only neutralized, but shattered. Evangelical Counsel for Abuse Prevention was formed to help ministry leaders understand the complexities of child protection and abuse prevention. They are establishing standards and an accreditation program that will help verify that appropriate measures are in place at your church or ministry. Learn more about them. Find a helpful and free assessment tool to help you see how you measure up in this area. Go to abuseprevention.org and click on the link for this resource assessment. Evangelical Counsel for Abuse Prevention.
And this June, attend the national conference. Go to abuseprevention.org and register with ABWE21 as the promo code to receive 20% off your ticket. That's promo code ABWE21 to receive 20% off. Brooks Buser, president of Radius International.
I am here with Mark Dever, senior pastor at Capitol Hill Baptist and president of 9 Marks.
When you go to a culture that's a different language than yours, you're ending up in a kind of majority language that's been reached. And there are other peoples still more hidden, and it's those people who are often almost entirely unreached, and they take more cross-cultural effort. Is there a way we can better train people to have more realistic expectations of what life is like in the kind of 2 steps away from my culture, and be able to sustain family life with its normal difficulties there, so that there can be a long years and even decades long witness in that culture? And it seems like Radius is set up to provide that training. Radius is about reaching unreached people groups.
Go to radiusinternational.org, radiusinternational.org.
And we're back with Bob Bixby, president of Bayseed Bayseed International. Where did I get international? I'm just adding international to the end of everything.
Bayseed, very local. Bayseed, very local.
Okay. Bayseed, just Bayseed. President of Bayseed.
Yeah.
It's a missions podcast, so I just assume that everybody is, sitting on top of a global empire. But Bob, I like where we ended before the break, which was, this idea that everybody wants to have a big global vision. Nobody wants to put on the compression socks. Nobody wants to do the dishes, right? Just doing those small, ordinary things and operating within the ordinary calling of God. And so I love that balance in what you're saying. But Scott, I think we need to make this applicable to missionaries as well in an international context.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm thinking of guys who might be listening to today, and ladies, I think of pastor friend Mark, an older church and kind of an established Christian area, and maybe thinking about, okay, well, what does mission look like, in an established setting versus, maybe someone that just got sent to the field. They're in an unevangelized setting with a people group that they've never shared the gospel with before. And so you have a huge diversity of what potential could be there. So, how could that look different? How would you think developing and focusing a vision maybe look different for people in different settings?
Well, I think that the most important setting before our actual context in our own soul is, does it have a biblical setting? And there are some, the wonderful thing about the Bible is its universality in that it's applicable wherever we go. So if we're called to China, or if we're called to Africa, there's components of our vision, at least at the first part of it, that are similar. And I think I think personally that I'm not going to get behind a vision of any missionary or, church planting pastor who may have some really concrete plans, but they don't know how to tie their plans to biblical rationale. For example, years ago, maybe you guys remember this. Scott, you're older, so you'll remember this, but I think there was a book called The Gospel Blimp. You guys remember that?
I'm old enough that I could have forgotten it, but unfortunately I did not forget that.
Did Scott ride it? Was it the Hindenburg? Because Scott's actually pretty up there and advanced in years.
The Gospel Blimp was this guy who had a vision for reaching the neighborhoods of his city with leaflets that he would drop from a huge gospel blimp. And so the story went on that he did it, and of course got everybody mad and all that kind of stuff, but he was committed to his vision.
Revival broke out everywhere.
And revival did not break out. So before I get to where I think your question is leading, to me, it's important that our vision be scripturally defensible and biblically and body affirmed, in the sense that, people may say, "Oh, you're a lone nut on that," but I could see what you're thinking. We need that, and we need that affirmation from the body of Christ, kind of a informal laying of hands on what we're called to do, that encourages us to go forward. So I have two models, for example. This might be helpful to missionaries. When I started thinking of Paul's team, Paul the Apostle's team, and he basically had four kinds of teammates always with him wherever he went. He had the Peter and Barnabas people. Those are the preachers that support him, maybe correct him, encourage him. They're kind of his peers. But Paul had the surroundings of the apostles. That was part of his entourage. Not specifically in traveling to Corinth, for example, but this kind of accountability. He had Timothy and Titus. Those are dedicated people that had his interest in mind, were committed to the gospel, would themselves become leaders, if not were already leaders. And so he concentrated about, he always had a Timothy and Titus. And then the third category he had when he went many places, was a Priscilla and Aquila. These are professional people who could move their job to a place and dig roots in a place professionally, but they went, like the scriptures say, to help the churches wherever they went. And they could take an Apollos and instruct him and so forth. And the fourth category was Phoebe and Lydia. These are deep pockets that could provide, a $5,000 check or $100,000 check or a house or property or whatnot. And so my vision coming out 7 years ago out here was, okay, this is kind of a biblically defensible. It's not stupid, but I'm going to pray that God gives me some people in each of these categories as we move forward. And another way that I could illustrate it is in Titus 3, 12 and 13 and 14, where Paul says to Titus at the end of his letter, he says, make haste to do your best to speed to bring Zenas the lawyer here to Nicopolis, and make sure that either with Artemis or I can't remember. Let me look at my notes here. Tychicus, and bring them here quickly to Nicopolis. And to me, if you break that down, there are reproducible aspects that can become part of a church vision. There's a zealous pace. There, do your best to speed. There are skilled people. Zenas, the lawyer. Apollos is mentioned there. Actually, all six people that are alluded to in those two verses are super skilled people. There are strategic places. Nicopolis, total provisions. Paul says lacking nothing. There's conscientious planning. He said bring Artemis or Tychicus. So there's even a backup plan. There's a need-based prioritization. cases, he said that they would know how to help in cases of urgent need. And then there's congregational productivity. Our people need to learn to devote themselves to this. So in my thinking, what's a vision for the Bay Area? I'm thinking, how can we best get to this goal at a zealous pace? Because you can do anything for a long time if you want to, and things are always going to go at a longer pace than you want to. Who are the skilled people? That's why Scott, I was excited about Scott coming, because he's skilled in areas that I'm not, and so
good.
forth.
I'm glad somebody was excited about Scott leaving us.
Yeah, well, when I myself am the bar, it's pretty low. So
tears were shed in Pennsylvania.
No, but my point is, you have to think about a vision. It's not something that just smacks you across the face. I think the people who had a vision really thought through it, became a strategy, and then they could lock in on it. And other people, other visionaries can share, 80% of it. Nobody's going to share it 100%. That's just not the way it works. But we get this vision and pursue it and follow it. And I think a missionary has to go and he has to become a student, not only of the scriptures, but of the context and the culture. And it may take time, but unfortunately, some missionaries go and right away they have a plan, and they're invested 3 years into their plan before they realize it was stupid.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is just me, but I would encourage people to really take the time once they get into their place to ask God to sharpen their vision or adjust their vision now that they're in the context, and let time go by before they actually lock down on one.
So to make explicit what you're saying too, it's okay for a vision to change. You're not a sellout if it changes because you learn more, because God teaches you more, which I think itself is actually probably helpful for somebody to hear who's listening to this. It's helpful for me to think through. Now, in your mind, though, you can dream and you can talk about having a vision and being able to envision an outcome in ministry. We want to see it go from dream to reality, though, right? And we want to pray that God would bless all of our efforts so that our vision would go from dream to reality.
Well, and so many leaders out there, right? Like they think of themselves as visionaries, but they never see anything actually get done. They just sit around and think about stuff. And that's not what you're talking about either. So,
or there is this sense in which the term vision casting is used for like, hey, I'm the prophetic leader. I set the direction. You all execute it. Right. But I'm the one with direct insights from the Lord, and you're just going to kind of follow in my train. And that is not what we're talking about here.
The term visionary could be code for, I'm a lazy bum.
Right. Yeah. Or cult leader. Right. The charismatic personality that sets the direction, then everyone just sort of follows along with that. Again, not what we're talking about here, but there is a level of the leader has to execute that vision then.
And that's why I think if we all have to define these abstract terms in a way that's useful for us. But this definition for me is useful because this is a vision that you have to sacrifice for, and you will die to yourself for it to happen, because this is what is good for the church and for the glory of God. And I think there's a little bit of a difference there, because there is I'm bored by leaders who aren't ambitious, but there's a holy ambition and there's an unholy ambition, and sometimes it's mixed. So I think the vision, you said earlier, it changes. It does change, but it's more like tweaked, because there's aspects of it. For example, I had a vision to come out here and just start with the 4 categories of people, Lydia and Phoebe, and God gave us a few individuals that wrote some sizable checks right at the beginning. Paul and Barnabas, Peter and Barnabas. God gave me a few pastor friends that really held my hands up. Timothy and Titus. Ricky came right away. And Priscilla and Aquila. We had a couple that moved out and just served faithfully in the church. And so, but there was enough concrete component to that I could pray. But I went to a number of people who I thought would be Phoebe and Lydia, and they didn't pan out. And my approach to Phoebe and Lydia changed over time. So there's constant tweaking and adjusting.
So there's so much there, and I really appreciate you taking the time to join us and just get our wheels thinking. A couple last thoughts. What are some things that you're reading, and it doesn't have to even be about leadership, that maybe have sparked some thoughts that keep helping you develop this area? Anything you could recommend for reading or further study? And then how can people get in touch with you, find out more about you? They want to give to Bayseed, would love to see that happen. Or if they want to come out and even be a part of the work, how can they get in touch with you?
Well, I'll just say this is not super exciting, but what I read last night just really moved my heart. And I think actually clarified my vision, because my small group is going through Pilgrim's Progress. And we are at the point where Pilgrim's Progress it approaches Palace Beautiful, which is the church. And it was the nonconformist church in the day. And they're approaching Palace Beautiful, and he's met by watchful and discretion and prudence and piety and charity. And we were talking about it, and it shows, this house was built by the Lord of the Hill, and he built it for the relief and security of the pilgrims. And Pilgrim shows up there, and he sees the two lines that are chained, which possibly represent not just things to be afraid of, but actually government that is fearsome, that's intimidating, and before they can come into this nonconformist church. But watchful sees Pilgrim, and he sees Pilgrim halting, like it says in the Old English, and he cries out after him and says, "Come on, be of good cheer." And he just nudges him in, and then discretion comes. And I had our group discuss why do you think it was these other characteristics of the church are described in feminine characteristics? They are females, beautiful, grave, chaste, and so forth. And because there's, I think, a gentleness when discretion comes, that she begins to ask her questions. And at one point it says, because she's seen if he will come in by the rules of the house, which instructs me as a church planter, there need to be rules of the house before just, people can truly belong in. And so I'm getting off track on that. But discretion gave me she has a tear come into her eye and a smile on her face when Christian is answering, and she brings in these other characters to come and ask him more questions. I say that to say, my heart was filled with a vision for local churches in the Bay Area. And I thought of Jesus, who says, "Come unto me, all of you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." And you'll discover about me, he says, that I'm meek and lowly and tender of heart. And if we can have people, I said to my group, we need to be people who are like watchful, that are seeing these people on the outside about to balk and be afraid to join us because we're crazies that believe in a marriage only between a man and a woman, or whatever the crazy stuff that we believe, and be of good cheer. And then we need to have, from my fundamentalist background, I would have written discretion as an armed soldier with, a bulky, masculine man with a growl saying, "Let me ask you some questions before you come in." But John Bunyan,
where are you at on secondary separation?
Right. But John Bunyan described discretion as a beautiful virgin with that was grave and serious and tender, asking these questions in order to welcome in. And so moving from this abstract story to concrete, the prayers, my vision, so to speak, for our church is that we would be that welcoming community for all of those people that are following Christ without sacrificing purity and chastity and holiness and integrity, and still live by the rules of the house to bring them into the family.
And
that's what I'm reading. I just read that last night. So you asked what I read lately. So
that's a beautiful story to end the discussion of vision with, because it's also just the reminder of the importance of Palace Beautiful, the local church. I mean,
right.
At the end of the day, whatever your dream is in ministry, in cross-cultural ministry in particular, if it doesn't involve the local church and the beauty of local church fellowship, then your vision is off. And I think that's an important thing to add. Yeah, Bob, what can we do to hear more from you and follow you?
Well, you can write me personally at Bob@Redeemer SV, S for Silicon, V for Valley.com. And our website is RedeemerFremont.com and RedeemerSV.com. We have different ways. We still do not have the Bayseed. That is being worked on as we speak right now, the Bayseed website.
And if you have any questions or thoughts for us, email alex@missionspodcast.com. Before you leave, make sure that you rate this show and leave us a positive review as well in your favorite podcast app. That helps the tech overlords who control the algorithms, helps us get this content in front of more people. Please like it, share it with a friend, and join us next week on the Missions Podcast. Thanks for listening.